Welcome back to Medieval Mason. In today's video, I'll be showing you how I built the unpainted version of this detailed guard tower. I started this build by looking at a variety of pictures and similar models. After I decided on a design, I cut out a foundation of XPS insulation foam. Since I wanted to make the tower hollow, I cut out 4 separate wall pieces. Once complete, I used a combination of craft and hot glue to bind the pieces together. After these were in place, I pressed a square of XPS foam into the top of the tower to give the model added strength. Next, I cast several sheets of rough cut stone bricks using spray foam and a homemade mold. If you're interested in learning how to make one of these molds, I've placed a link in the description below to a past tutorial. Once cured, I cut the stone texture sheets to size before gluing them onto my tower base. Next, I cut out several small foam bricks and stacked them in a L-shaped pattern. I then made a series of cuts to remove excess around the edges. The result was a corner piece that had a square center with edges that could fit over top my stone texture. I then applied hot glue to the corner bricks and secured them to the base. The next step was to blend the rough stones with the corner brickwork. This was done using joint compound and a wet paintbrush. Next, I cut out several small strips of foam to be formed into arrow slits and a door frame. I applied a rock texture to these pieces with the use of a tinfoil ball before assembling and hot gluing the parts together. To install the door frame, I simply used a fresh X-Acto knife to easily cut an opening into my rock wall. The same process was done for the arrow slit windows. A light application of joint compound was then applied to seamlessly blend the edges. Next, it was time to construct the wooden hoardings. The first step was to cut out 4 identical bases, as well as mill up some thin foam strips that could be turned into planking and windows. I then used a wire brush to give all pieces a wood grain texture. Next, I used a fresh X-Acto blade to cut a plank pattern into my XPS base. By going over the cuts with a dull pencil, I was able to give the planks beveled edges. To add more visual interest, I hot glued on a series of exterior cross beams. These were then trimmed with an X-Acto knife. I kept adding bits of supporting planking until I thought the piece looked balanced. Once I was satisfied with the hoarding's appearance, I used an X-Acto knife to cut away the excess. Additionally, I cut the planks on the sides to give the illusion of old boarded up arrow slits. Next, I glued down a series of foam strips to make the plank roof. For the front, I used an electric knife to get a clean, smooth cut. With the point of my compass, I pressed a series of nail holes near the seams of each board. I then aged the wood with my X-Acto knife, removing sharp edges and adding stress marks. This was one of the most satisfying parts of the build, as it really enhanced the realism of the piece. Finally, it was time to attach the hoardings with a generous application of hot glue. I then used spray foam to fill in any gaps between the hoardings and the model's base. Next, I used some air dry clay to cut out the iron supports for the cross beams. These were then secured to the model using tacky glue and several small nails. A dull pencil was then used to give the clay a hammered metal texture. Lastly, I used some scrap foam to make the window hatches and main door. For the top of my guard tower, I needed windows, glass panes, X-shaped wood supports, and lots of support beams. To begin, I used a 3D filament printer to print out a dozen basic windows in the desired scale. An application of Mod Podge was then used to smooth out the 3D printer lines. Once dried, I installed the windows into sheets of XPS foam with the use of an electric knife. I then used the electric knife to cut window openings in the top of the model. To make the X-shaped supports, I cut a master pattern out of a block of XPS foam, and then shaved off a series of thin copies. These were then glued into place along with the rest of the support beams. Once all 4 sides of the tower's apartment were complete, each side was attached using hot glue. A thick support beam was then placed at the corners of the apartment. To seal everything together, I applied a coating of Mod Podge. At this point, I realized I had forgotten to build the hoarding structural supports. I quickly formed some L-shaped beams out of foam and air-dry clay. Once completed, I cut slots for the supports and secured them to the model with hot glue. For the roof of the tower, I cut out a pyramid-shaped piece of foam, as well as several dozen small strips. The strips were then given wood texture and applied to the pyramid to make a board roof. To make the roof's cap, I textured a piece of foam with a foil ball and inserted a series of small nails. To blend it all together, I then applied joint compound to the seams. One final touch was to drill several holes in the model's base, into which I twisted several heavy bolts. This gave the foundation more weight and stability. In the next video, I'll be completing this build with a realistic paint job. I will leave a link in the description if you'd like to watch it.